The manner in at half time to be asked the question and being put under so much pressure from the opposition.
What St Kilda built with their pressure in the first half was very strong, of course.
I just asked them, I said, how do you want to play? How do you want to play this second half? And they said they want to play our way, we don't want to change anything. We've got to structurally change up a couple of things to help us. And so we backed that in and we went again.
But then they had to build energy off the contest themselves, and they were able to do that.
I think there's something in when the team can absorb, pressure, and it wasn't all going for us. Be able to reset ourselves at half time and then be able to come out and correct a few things and go to work on that. It says a lot about the group.
Carlton's win streak continues to grow, and with that, their confidence grows, and the possibility of finals also grows. After Carlton beat the Saints this weekend, Joe from the Almost Blues Brothers put it perfectly when he said,
"That was not our best performance yesterday, by a long stretch. But that was arguably, not even arguably, that was our best win as a club in this last 8 weeks."
Carlton haven't really ever been the kind of team in recent memory to come back from a deficit, but the resolve shown by the Blues in the second half led the charge as they went against this theory. Today, we break that down. Let's go. Some would say the 22-point deficit followed by a 49-9 second half signals a tale of two halves. But upon closer inspection, there are plenty of similarities between both halves. The defensive structure has been quietly successful all season long, even in times of struggle. And the same could be said for this game in the first half. For the most part, intercepting was quite common. Carlton's last 5, which has reaped reward, has seen Carlton's second last for defensive one-on-ones. So here is where you're seeing a lot of difficulty for oppositions to create isolation. And that's credit to Carlton's ability to defend the ground and slow play down, so you're seeing a lot more down the line kicks or spacing, which allows Carlton's defenders to peel off and apply a spoil or take an intercept. To three-quarter time, the Saints, a team renowned for playing on, were heavily limited in this regard, which played into Carlton's hands. That being said, some of the goals Carlton conceded was when St Kilda had a bit more fluidity, having 36% of their defensive 50 chains equal an inside 50 in the first, 16% over league average. In this play, they play on after a lead-up mark, Sharman takes the mark, does the same thing, and Pitto, who shouldn't be boundary side, he should be pushing Marshall there to corner him off, is placed under the ball, and all it takes is a kick in the vicinity of Marshall to get a shot at goal. You'll see something that takes a very similar form in this first quarter example. It happened only a few times, but the few times it did, it was awfully damaging, especially for a side who struggled to score from other means. And it also fed them their only goal of the second half, the exact same way. The tackle count wasn't poor either. Carlton's tackle count at halftime sat at 33, which had us on track to reach the similar mark we had set in previous fixtures. Carlton have been in the top 4 for pressure acts in the last 5 games, including this one, so it wasn't a lack of effort. There were instances in the first half where, as a byproduct of pressure, we had shots at goal. I like this example where you could see both systems countering each other, where both teams were quick in recovering from a loss in possession. From a Carlton perspective, we know this is nothing new considering recent times. And you could also see the running halfback flankers with the role in the first half, as they have been doing in recent weeks. Zach Fisher, I think, in this game embodied how much we lean on this mold of player, as he had 11 first quarter touches of effect, dropping to 3 effective touches in the second, obviously, when we dropped off. You can see in the second, when we were lacking a bit of ball movement, him maintaining a position more centrally and enabling ball movement of benefit. A continuation of Fish sitting on the back of the stoppage and farming more beneficial possessions in the second half was incredibly helpful. But the problems were blatantly clear. The first half was riddled with Carlton mistakes, namely turnovers and fumbles. There were a handful of goals conceded simply because of this. When I think of culprits, my mind defaults to Caleb Marchbank, who ironically had moments where he was too slow to dispose of the ball, but also there were times where he spent the ball before he even had it. It meant Carlton weren't getting possession or territory as high up the ground as they would have liked due to butchering the crap out of it. Nor was that strong backline of theirs ever really set given the vulnerability of where the ball was turned over at times. For example, this one here, which occurs due to a shallow forward 50 entry, and then the turnover follows in an area that enables a direct path to goal. And this can be attributed to St Kilda's immense pressure, forcing Carlton to overuse the football in some cases. Jack Martin was pretty much alone on an island for clean disposal in the first half. I think he definitely was one of our best in that half. This is a great flick, but Paddy Cripps tells the story here, fumbling it on numerous occasions. You saw what happens when cleanliness was achieved. On this example, Martin crashes the pack, and then an expansive Newman handball, much to the effect of an inward Dow kick earlier on in the quarter, allowed flow on this possession. Charlie's kick across the ground is sublime, and was something that in this part of the ground was severely lacking. I think this is another great example where I think we actually do well to cope with the result we achieve, but you can see that handball chain really struggles to gain any traction because the Saints are on our tail every step of the way. And this is what helped generate their absurd halftime tackle count of over 50. Or this example where we haven't exceeded halfway and Dowie passes the ball to Fish, who's about to run directly into a wall of Saints. Smart decisions can become clouded when the heat is high, and that is one we got punished for, incredibly avoidable. But when looking at the main reasons for the turnaround, it's actually incredibly simple. Contested footy, a lack of turnovers, and an incredible adrenaline rush which saw repeat efforts and shit I didn't think players on this team were capable of. The Blues were equal with St Kilda for contested possessions at 73 at the half. They ended plus 15 in that category. The Blues were up 22-16 in clearances at the half. They ended plus 24 in that category. That was a source of 9 scoring shots, 5 of them goals in the second half, to the Saints 1 behind after it was 7-6 in the first half. It headlined the last quarter where they were in possession for 54% of that quarter to the Saints 33%. And that enabled an inside 50 count to go from 25 apiece at the half to 56-44 Carlton's way by the game's end. Obviously, that domination overall contributed to a 30 points to 3 final term. And recent history would suggest this isn't a coincidence, as in their last 5 wins, Carlton are first in contested possessions, 5th for ground ball gets, and thus first for around the ground stoppage clearances. Not to mention St Kilda's highest score of the year last weekend against the Hawks came largely from their clearance game. So it makes sense that Carlton's dominance in looking after the ball and winning it at the contest also lowered the ceiling considerably for St Kilda's scoring output. Now I'm going to spring a couple more stats at ya. This will make sense in a little bit of a moment. In the last 5 games, Carlton are second for metres gained, below average for kicking efficiency, and in the bottom 3 for clangers. Now, this game wasn't necessarily attractive to the eye. It was pretty scrappy. Carlton knew this played into their hands. Simply trying to will the ball forward, get it higher up the ground into more attacking areas, making things as chaotic as possible was a smart objective to set. Even if they couldn't actually take possession, they backed themselves in to force a stoppage and feed more contested footy. Additionally, it allowed their backs to create a high line and tuck St Kilda into their back 50 further. This happened like crazy because Carlton's relentlessness and edge at the contest was on steroids. Unworldly. That stat we mentioned earlier, defensive 50 chains to inside 50s. St Kilda were well below average in the second half, with Carlton having 13 forward half intercepts. That also can be backed up for St Kilda having only 6 forward half disposals in the first 13 minutes of the second half. And so, given Carlton's stability defensively, this just fed Carlton's ability to repeat entries into the 50 and generate more opportunities, less of the nature to our entries in the first half. That is where St Kilda's plays weren't set up and couldn't anticipate the unpredictability of the possession. We didn't have that constant high kick to Charlie that was intercepted regularly in the first half. You could see what happened when numbers were set up through this example where the umpire delayed the free kick for Dow. And you can also see the unpredictability working wonders in a first half example to get our only second quarter score. There were some defensive plays which were absolutely nuts by the Blues. It personified a team playing with a do or die attitude. And that ultimately meant the Blues only shipped off that one solitary goal the Saints scored early in the third. Here's one where Marshall intercepts, but the kick is offline and a chain of defensive efforts ensue. Working collectively is the defensive structure on the perimeter of the 50 to delay the exit, and then those internally locking it in. Motlop is the clear pioneer in this example. And like the first half, it's a very push and pull kind of dynamic. Both teams lose it and regain it quickly. It takes St Kilda a bit of outside the box thinking to get it clear, but that's some forward half intensity that was paramount to Carlton's territory dominance in the second half. And then you've got Nick Newman, who was unbelievably good and led these inspirational defensive efforts. Shortly after that instance was this, where 3 Carlton defenders zone up smartly. Given the trajectory of the kick, they're all positioned to 2-on-1 in any situation. It's Newman who ultimately puts his body on the line and wins the free. He helps us out here with a vital tap to allow a switch that propels us forward. And then right as the ball slingshots the other way, as we cough it up, the numbers come up the ground to delay the play enough for the kick to be pressured enough to allow the zoning of Newman to be incredibly effective. Kemp's positioning to sit boundary side actually blocks the periphery off needed to find Newman's man, who is located on the boundary line. Then after he does that, he gets it in the middle and has a bit of a stinker, failing to highlight Kemp is in a paddock. But even with this free kick being conceded, that work rate is just nuts. And afterwards, he's understandably cooked. And then he covers our ass again on this possession too, disciplined enough to not give away the free. Like, I knew he was good, but he had an absolute blinder on the weekend. This one does it for me though. You've got players coming in from all directions, the desperation from Newman on the line, 5 players in the frame in pursuit, 3 more players go up, and then finally relief. If you want a reason why St Kilda weren't scoring, this is it. I'm actually lost for words how ridiculous this intensity is. Finals like, probably. Although as Carlton fans, we don't really know what that looks like, do we? We can also note a few plays that personified this turnaround and our ability to elevate the standard at the coalface. Paddy Dow is one name who springs to mind. Can see a first quarter example where Brad Crouch, who was integral to their success in this game, sends Dowie away with a push-off and feeds a clearance, and they score a goal as a part of the ripple effect. We talked about how St Kilda's scoring last week was centralised around clearance, and how stopping that source would help tremendously. This happens on a couple of occasions where his opponent is the one to get first hands on it. There were a couple other little clunky things he did, which could have been approached differently as well, where there'd be times we forced a turnover, but Dow failed to capitalise in possession. On a couple of occasions, he'd try to hoist the ball up to avoid his arms getting pinned, but he wouldn't actually dispose of the footy. Obviously, I can credit this sort of stuff to pressure, but we like holding players accountable because we want them to be better. Then as the game wears on, Dow slowly becomes the man in charge, holding position at the right times, the gap between him and his opponent tightens, and thus some of the ascendancy and clearance type stuff can be attributed to him. Here, Dow forcing an errant handball has a ripple effect. It means we get possession to advance it here, which is then where we can close off Brad Hill into a crowded space along the line, which also means a poor kick results as he overcorrects when kicking more centrally. And we actually kick a goal from the turnover generated. It was a half we needed from Dow, and I think he needed for himself as well. A player that I think had a really good all-round game was Blake Acres. Beyond the stats, I think for a scrappy game like this, having extra physical players was of benefit. And in glimpses, you see Acres helping the ball to be extracted or enabling the things we did well in the second half, through how strong he was in the hips standing up in the tackle. I actually think this is a secret weapon. He doesn't do this nearly enough in comparison to the shanking he does when he kicks the footy at times. Such a unique ability to have with such aerobic capacity. Really could open the game up a lot more, and it did in the last quarter with his superb goal. I also look at the rucking situation, and this was a bit of a question mark and has been for weeks. TDK in the forward line could be considered a waste, yet getting TDK into the ruck is like putting a shoe on that doesn't fit, sending Pitto into the forward line. The first half, Marshall had much more of an influence around the ground and aerially. In this example, Marshall is kicking to Pitto, where ideally he's taking a mark, having pushed back to be the outnumber. You'll notice our numbers aren't nearly positioned in the right spot to clog the middle. Pitto doesn't mark, we go down like a bunch of bowling pins, and all the Saints are basically upright. So now we're concerned with going goal side because of this disadvantage to block a run into an open goal. Meanwhile, because of this failure to congest this space, 2 Saints are freed up because they checked their run, contrary to where the Blues players are going. In the second half, you could see the ledger shift our way, which was imperative for a win. The impact around the ground by both ruckmen was felt more so in creating this harsh disparity between both sides, especially by TDK, who could have been mistaken for an elephant in a stampede. Like, get out of the way. There was no deviation in his movement, he just charged. And it promoted that gaining territory mindset we held, which led to instances like these. Just opening the game up entirely, given how unpredictable a play like that was for the improvisation present. Or this one where he wins it and extracts the ball to Fish, sitting on the back of the stoppage, which we eventually score a goal from. That Paddy Dow goal that got everyone standing, well, you'll see both ruckmen involved on this rebound into the forward 50 to feed that goal by their ability to halt a St Kilda advancement and also be enough of a commanding presence to knock it down and feed that area of the game we were running right in. I think of all the feel-good stories of the second half, this is one that sweeps under the radar a bit more so. So there you go. The win against the Saints indicates we're a step closer to seeing a complete Carlton if current form sustains itself. Missing players, looking out of ideas in the first half, the Blues showed incredible resolve, and the Blues will be better for the experience. It sets the stage for a huge game, next up against the D's. What was your favourite story out of the second half comeback and the game overall? Thanks for tuning in. I'm loving the positive reception I've been getting for making these. So keep sending that feedback in, and I look forward to having you back for another Carlton analysis right here next week. Have a good one, and bye for now.